Sienna Parker adjusted the strap of her nephew's golf bag as she followed him onto the pristine green of the country club's golf course. She had no business being here, she wasn't a member, nor did she have any interest in golf, but Harrison had begged her to take him. And after everything the 8-year-old had been through, she couldn't say no. Aunt Sienna, look, that guy just hit the ball so far. Harrison's face lit up as he pointed to a man on the driving range. Sienna's gaze followed his finger, landing on a broad-shouldered man with dark hair, dressed in a fitted polo and expensive-looking slacks. He swung his club again, effortlessly sending the ball soaring across the sky. Even from a distance, he exuded confidence and control. "That's impressive," she admitted, nudging Harrison forward. "Come on, let's get you set up." Harrison eagerly placed a ball on the tee, gripping his tiny club with determination. He swung, missing entirely. He tried again, another miss, his little face scrunched in frustration. "Here, let me help," Sienna said, kneeling beside him. She adjusted his stance, but before she could guide his swing, a deep voice interrupted. "He's holding the club too tightly." Sienna turned her head sharply, coming face to face with the man from the driving range. Up close, he was even more striking, strong jawline, piercing blue eyes, and an air of effortless power. He was the kind of man who commanded attention without trying. Harrison beamed. "You're really good. Do you play professionally?" The man let out a low chuckle. "Not quite. But I've had practice." He turned to Sienna, his gaze lingering. "Mind if I help?" Sienna hesitated. She didn't know this man, but Harrison was already nodding enthusiastically. "Go ahead," she relented. The man stepped behind Harrison, gently adjusting the boy's grip. "Relax your hands. Let the club do the work." He guided the swing, and this time the ball soared forward. "Yes," Harrison cheered, jumping up and down. "That was awesome," Sienna smiled, touched by how patient the man was with her nephew. "Thank you, that was really kind of you." He extended a hand. "Xander Lawson." "Sienna Parker," she replied, shaking his hand. His grip was firm, warm. "Is he your son?" Xander asked, nodding toward Harrison. She shook her head. "My nephew, I'm taking care of him for a while." Xander's brows lifted, as if intrigued by her answer, but he didn't press. Instead, he turned his attention back to Harrison. "You've got potential, kid. Keep practicing." Harrison grinned. "Can you show me another trick?" Xander glanced at Sienna, silently asking permission. She couldn't deny the excitement on Harrison's face. "All right," she said. "One more." Xander spent the next 20 minutes teaching Harrison small techniques, his deep voice calm and encouraging. Sienna watched, surprised by how easily he interacted with her nephew. He didn't seem like the type to have patience for kids. He looked more like the kind of man who spent his time in boardrooms or private jets. When they finally wrapped up, Xander turned to Sienna. "Would you like to have dinner with me?" Sienna blinked. "What?" He smiled, amused by her reaction. "Dinner, tonight." She let out a short laugh. "You don't even know me." "I know enough." His gaze was steady, unwavering. "And I'd like to know more." Sienna hesitated. She wasn't used to men like him, men who were direct, self-assured, and impossibly attractive. And yet, there was something about him that made her pulse race. Harrison tugged on her sleeve. "Say yes, Aunt Sienna," she sighed, shaking her head at her nephew's enthusiasm. Then, looking back at Xander, she surprised herself by saying, "All right, dinner." Xander's smile deepened. "I'll pick you up at 7. As he walked away, Sienna exhaled, her heart pounding. She had a feeling her life was about to change in ways she never expected. Sienna paced in her small apartment, glancing at the clock for what felt like the 100th time. 7 o'clock was approaching fast, and she still wasn't sure why she had agreed to this dinner. Xander Lawson was completely out of her league, a man who carried himself with the confidence of someone used to getting what he wanted. And yet, here she was, rifling through her closet, searching for something remotely appropriate for a dinner she could only assume would be at a place far fancier than anywhere she typically went. "Aunt Sienna, you're going to wear a hole in the floor," Harrison teased from the couch, his little legs swinging over the edge. She shot him a look. "I don't know what to wear," Harrison shrugged. "Something pretty." With a sigh, she pulled out a simple midnight blue dress, one of the only nice things she owned. It wasn't designer, but it fit well and made her feel put together. After slipping it on, she twisted her hair into a loose-up dough and swiped on a hint of lipstick. The sound of a car pulling up outside made her stomach flip. She took a deep breath, grabbing her coat as she headed to the door. When she stepped outside, her breath hitched. Parked at the curb was a sleek black luxury car, its polished surface gleaming under the streetlights. Xander stood beside it, effortlessly elegant in a tailored suit, his piercing gaze locking onto hers the moment she appeared. "You look beautiful," he said smoothly, opening the passenger door for her. She hesitated for a split second before sliding into the plush leather seat. The door shut with a soft click, and moments later, the car rolled forward, gliding down the street with an ease that spoke of its price tag. As they drove, the silence stretched between them, not uncomfortable but charged with something unspoken. Sienna finally cleared her throat. "So where are we going?" "You'll see," Xander replied, a knowing glint in his eyes. Minutes later, they pulled up in front of an exclusive rooftop restaurant perched above the city. The moment they stepped inside, a maitre d' greeted them by name, or rather, greeted Xander. Within seconds, they were led to a private table overlooking the glittering skyline. Sienna sank into her chair, trying not to let her awe show. The setting was breathtaking, but it was the man across from her who commanded her attention. "You don't seem like the kind of guy who does casual dinner dates," she remarked, folding her hands in her lap. Xander leaned back, studying her. "And you don't seem like the kind of woman who's easily impressed." She tilted her head. "Is that a compliment?" "An observation," he corrected. "Tell me, Sienna, what is it you do when you're not making kids into golf prodigies?" She smiled at the memory of Harrison's excitement earlier in the day. "I work at a publishing house. Nothing glamorous, but I love it." His expression sharpened with interest. "Books, then." "What's your favorite?" She hesitated, then answered honestly. "Anything with a strong story, something that makes you feel something real." He nodded slowly. "I admire that." She raised an eyebrow. "And what about you?" "What do you do besides being mysteriously good at golf?" His lips twitched slightly. "Business, investments mostly." That was vague, too vague. But before she could press him further, their waiter arrived, seamlessly pouring them each a glass of wine before taking their orders. As the evening progressed, Sienna found herself unexpectedly drawn in. Xander was sharp, attentive, and had a way of listening that made her feel like the most important person in the room. But there was something else beneath the surface, something guarded. "You don't talk much about yourself," she pointed out after their plates had been cleared. Xander studied her for a beat before answering. "I've learned that people often prefer the version of me they assume rather than the truth." She frowned slightly. "And what's the truth?" He held her gaze steadily. "That's something you'll have to figure out." The intensity in his voice sent a shiver down her spine. There was more to this man than his wealth, more than his carefully composed exterior. And for reasons she couldn't quite explain, she wanted to know what that was. As the night drew to a close, Xander escorted her back to his car, his hand resting lightly at the small of her back. The warmth of his touch sent an unexpected thrill through her. When they reached her apartment, he stepped out to open her door. She turned to face him, uncertain how to end the night. "Thank you," she said softly. "For dinner, for everything." Xander reached up, brushing a stray hair from her cheek. "This won't be the last time, Sienna." Her breath caught at the certainty in his voice, and she had the distinct feeling he was right. Sienna had barely set foot inside her apartment when Harrison bounded over, his eyes sparkling with mischief. "Did he kiss you?" He blurted, peering up at her expectantly. Sienna groaned, tossing her purse onto the couch. "Harrison?" He grinned. "Well, did he?" She rolled her eyes. "No, and that's none of your business anyway." Harrison flopped onto the couch, clearly unimpressed. "He should have." "He's like a prince from one of your books." Sienna laughed despite herself. "I don't think millionaires count as princes," Harrison shrugged. "Same thing. He's rich, he's nice, and he looks at you like, 'Time for bed,'" she interrupted, pointing toward his room. Harrison groaned dramatically, but he obeyed, giving her a knowing look before disappearing down the hall. When she was finally alone, Sienna sank onto the couch, pressing her fingers to her temples. Tonight had been unexpected. Xander Lawson wasn't just charming, he was intriguing, the kind of man who made you want to lean in just a little closer, even when you knew it was dangerous. And the way he had looked at her before he left, she exhaled sharply, shaking her head. She was reading too much into this. It had been one dinner, nothing more, but she had a sinking suspicion that Xander had no intention of leaving it at just one. The next morning, Sienna barely had time to settle at her desk before her coworker, Leela, slid into the chair across from her, arms folded, eyes gleaming with curiosity. "You're glowing," Leela announced. Sienna blinked. "I am not." "You are, and I know why." Leela leaned forward. "Tell me everything," Sienna sighed, setting her coffee down. "It was just dinner," Leela gasped. "So you admit it," Sienna groaned. "How did you even know?" Leela smirked. "Because you're smiling like you've got a secret, and you never smile at work unless someone brings in cupcakes." Sienna shook her head, but she couldn't deny it. Something about last night had left her feeling different. "Fine," she admitted. "I had dinner with someone, but it's not a big deal." Leela arched a brow. "Who?" Sienna hesitated. "Xander Lawson." Leela's jaw dropped. "The Xander Lawson." Sienna frowned. "You know him," Leela scoffed. "Everyone in this city knows him. He's a millionaire, Sienna. He owns half the luxury hotels downtown." Sienna blinked. "He never mentioned that." Leela threw her hands up. "Because he doesn't have to. His name is everywhere." Sienna's stomach flipped. She had known Xander was wealthy, but she hadn't realized just how powerful he was. Leela studied her. "Are you seeing him again?" Sienna hesitated. "I don't know." Leela grinned. "You will." The answer came sooner than expected. That evening, as Sienna and Harrison walked home from the park, a sleek black car pulled up beside them. The window rolled down, revealing Xander at the wheel. Harrison gasped. "Whoa, is that your car?" Xander smiled. "It is, and I was hoping I could steal your aunt for a little while." Harrison turned to Sienna. "Can he?" Sienna hesitated. I have a driver who can take you home," Xander offered smoothly, "or I can drop you both off after." Harrison's eyes widened. "Can we go, Aunt Sienna, please?" Sienna sighed, knowing resistance was futile. "All right." Xander opened the passenger door for her, and moments later they were cruising through the city. "Where are we going?" she asked. "You'll see." Minutes later they arrived at a private golf facility, far more exclusive than the one they had visited before. Harrison gasped. "This place is huge." Xander led them inside, where a staff member greeted him by name before leading them to a pristine indoor driving range. "I figured Harrison might want another lesson," Xander said. Harrison practically bounced with excitement. "Really?" Xander nodded. "If your aunt approves." Sienna looked at Harrison's eager face, then at Xander. "You didn't have to do this." "I wanted to," he said simply. And just like that, Harrison was off, gripping a club with newfound determination as Xander knelt beside him, offering patient instructions. Sienna watched, her heart tugging at the sight. Xander wasn't just indulging Harrison, he genuinely cared. And that terrified her. Because the more she saw of him, the harder it became to remind herself that men like him didn't belong in her world. But Xander Lawson was making it very clear he wasn't going anywhere. Sienna adjusted the strap of her purse as she stepped out of the car, her heart pounding harder than it should have been. Xander had just dropped her and Harrison off at their apartment, the ride home filled with easy conversation and laughter. But now, standing outside her door, she felt the weight of something unspoken pressing between them. Xander leaned against the car, his gaze steady. "I could get used to this," she raised an eyebrow. "Used to what?" "Spending time with you." His voice was low, deliberate. "And Harrison." Her breath caught. He said it so easily, like it was the most natural thing in the world, but nothing about this was natural. Xander Lawson wasn't a part of her life, at least. He wasn't supposed to be. "This isn't your world," she said quietly. He took a step closer, his presence overwhelming. "And what if I want it to be?" She shook her head. "Xander, you live in a world of luxury. Private dinners, exclusive clubs, million-dollar businesses. I'm just trying to keep my nephew's life as stable as possible." He didn't flinch. "And what if I don't care about any of that?" She laughed, though there was no humor in it. "You say that now. But eventually you'll realize how different we are." His hand reached out, brushing against hers. "I already know," he murmured, "and I don't care." Her pulse raced, but before she could respond, Harrison called from the doorway. "Aunt Sienna, I'm hungry," she exhaled, stepping back. "I should go." Xander nodded slowly. "I'll see you soon." She didn't answer. She couldn't, because if she did, she might say something she wasn't ready to admit. Days passed, and Xander wasn't deterred. He sent messages, small, thoughtful gestures that made ignoring him impossible. A book she had once mentioned wanting to read appeared on her doorstep. A box of Harrison's favorite snacks was delivered with a note that simply read, "For my favorite golf student." It was relentless and undeniably sweet. But it wasn't until he showed up at her workplace that she realized just how serious he was. She was sorting through manuscript submissions when Leila nearly knocked over her desk in excitement. "He's here," Sienna blinked. "Who?" Leila grabbed her arm, dragging her toward the lobby. "Xander Lawson, he's waiting for you." Her stomach flipped. "Here," Leila grinned, and looking like he just stepped out of a Millionaire magazine. Sienna swallowed hard and stepped into the lobby where Xander stood casually by the receptionist's desk, hands in his pockets. His presence was impossible to ignore, commanding, confident, and devastatingly handsome. He spotted her instantly, his expression unreadable. "Thought I'd take you to lunch," she hesitated. "Xander, before you say no, just hear me out." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. 1 hour. No expectations, just lunch. Her heart waged war against her better judgment, but one look at him standing there with that unwavering patience and she knew she was going to cave. Fine. 1 hour. The restaurant was elegant but not overpowering, a place she could tell he had chosen deliberately to make her comfortable. As they sat across from each other, he leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table. "Tell me what you're thinking," she sighed. "I'm thinking I don't understand you." A hint of amusement flickered in his eyes. "What's there to understand?" "You're persistent," she said. "You could have anyone. Why me?" His expression turned serious. "Because you make me feel like more than just my name." "More than what people expect me to be," she swallowed hard. "That's not an answer." He held her gaze. "It's the only one that matters." Her defenses wavered. He wasn't just saying what she wanted to hear, he meant it, and that terrified her. That evening, as she tucked Harrison into bed, her mind was still spinning. "Aunt Sienna," she glanced down at him. "Yeah," Harrison yawned. "Are you going to marry Xander?" She nearly choked. "What?" He shrugged sleepily. "He likes you, you like him." She smoothed his hair. "It's not that simple." He blinked up at her. "Why not?" She had no answer. Because maybe, just maybe it was. And that realization changed everything. Sienna stood at her kitchen counter, staring at the bouquet of deep red roses sitting in a crystal vase. They had arrived an hour ago, accompanied by a simple handwritten note from Xander, "Dinner tonight." She traced the edge of one of the petals, her mind tangled in a whirlwind of thoughts. Everything about him was overwhelming, not just his presence, but the way he made her feel. The way he refused to take the easy way out, the way he saw her when she wasn't sure she wanted to be seen. "Aunt Sienna, are we going?" Harrison's voice pulled her from her thoughts as he peeked around the doorway, his face filled with hopeful anticipation. She turned to him, arms crossed. "You don't even know where we're going." Harrison grinned. "It's Xander, it's going to be awesome." She sighed, shaking her head. "You're getting far too attached." Harrison shrugged, utterly unfazed. "You are too." She opened her mouth to argue but stopped herself, because he wasn't wrong. That evening when Xander arrived, he didn't just come for her. He had a second bouquet, this one a mix of bright, cheerful colors, which he handed to Harrison with a straight face. "For my favorite golf champion," Xander said. Harrison's eyes widened. "I get flowers too." "Of course," Xander replied. "You're part of the deal." Sienna pressed a hand to her forehead, torn between amusement and something far deeper. "You're impossible," Xander's eyes flickered to hers. "And yet, here you are." She swallowed hard and turned away before he could see how much that affected her. The car ride was quiet, the anticipation building as they drove through the city. When they pulled up outside a grand estate on the outskirts of town, Sienna's breath caught. "You live here?" she asked, taking in the sprawling grounds, the towering structure bathed in soft golden lights. "For now," Xander said, stepping out and opening the door for her. Harrison practically bounced beside her. "This is like a castle," Xander smiled. "Let's see if the inside meets your royal standards." The interior was just as stunning: high ceilings, sleek modern design mixed with touches of warmth that made it feel lived in rather than just another extravagant display of wealth. Harrison darted from room to room, marveling at everything, while Sienna stood in the foyer feeling slightly out of place. Xander noticed. "You're thinking too much." She gave him a look. "You don't know what I'm thinking." I do. He stepped closer, his voice low. You're wondering if you belong in a place like this. Her breath caught, but she didn't deny it. He tilted his head slightly. You do. She exhaled sharply, forcing herself to focus. Are you always this sure of things? When it matters. Before she could respond, Harrison's voice rang out from another room. Aunt Sienna, come look at this. She turned, grateful for the distraction. But as she walked away, she felt Xander's gaze linger, as though he was waiting for her to realize something she wasn't ready to admit. Dinner was set in a glass-walled dining room overlooking the city skyline. The table was adorned with soft candlelight, the atmosphere intimate despite the grandeur. As they ate, Harrison dominated the conversation, regaling Xander with stories from school and his latest fascination with space. Xander listened intently, engaging with an ease that made Sienna's heart ache in a way she didn't expect. When Harrison finally yawned, Xander leaned back in his chair. There's a guest room upstairs if he wants to rest. Sienna hesitated. I don't want to impose. You're not. Minutes later, Harrison was curled up in a bed that was far too extravagant for a child his size. Sienna tucked the blankets around him, brushing a hand through his hair before slipping out of the room. Xander was waiting in the hallway. Walk with me. She followed him through the house, past rooms filled with understated elegance, until they reached a terrace that overlooked the city. The night air was crisp, filled with the distant hum of life below. Xander leaned against the railing. You're holding back. Her fingers tightened around the fabric of her dress. I have to. Why? She turned to face him. Because this feels like something that doesn't happen in real life. You, me, this, she gestured around them. It's too much. His gaze didn't waver. Or maybe it's exactly right. She let out a soft laugh, shaking her head. You make it sound easy. Not easy, he corrected. Just worth it. She inhaled sharply, the vulnerability in his voice cutting through every defense she had built. Then, before she could stop herself, she whispered, I'm scared. His expression softened. So am I. That admission stole the breath from her lungs. He moved closer, his fingers brushing against hers. But I'm not walking away. She looked up at him, the city lights reflecting in his eyes. And for the first time, she wondered what if she didn't walk away either. Sienna stood on the terrace, wrapped in the quiet of the night with Xander beside her. His presence was steady, unwavering, as if he was waiting for her to make a choice. And maybe she was. She turned to him, searching his expression. You're serious about this? His gaze didn't falter. I don't say things I don't mean. Her chest tightened. This isn't easy for me. I don't expect it to be, he said, but I need you to know that I'm not walking away. I want this whatever this is between us, and I'll wait until you're ready to believe it too. She let out a breath, uncertainty warring with something undeniably real, but before she could respond, the sound of her phone vibrating in her purse broke the moment. She pulled it out, her stomach dropping at the name flashing across the screen. It was the social worker. Xander noticed her hesitation. Is everything all right? She swallowed hard before answering. Yes. The voice on the other end was gentle but direct. Sienna, I wanted to update you on Harrison's case. His mother has completed her program and is petitioning for custody. Sienna's grip on the phone tightened. Already, she's making progress and the court wants to assess the next steps. Her pulse pounded in her ears. What does that mean for Harrison? A meeting next week to discuss the transition. Her throat went dry. I understand. When she hung up, Xander was watching her carefully. What's going on? She struggled to find words, her mind reeling. Harrison's mother is trying to get custody back. Xander studied her, his expression unreadable. How do you feel about that? She let out a shaky breath. I don't know, I want what's best for him, but I can't imagine him leaving. Xander reached for her hand, his grip strong and reassuring. You're not alone in this. Her eyes burned. It's not your responsibility. His voice was firm. I don't care, I'm here, Sienna, for you, for him. She wanted to believe him, but fear clawed at her chest. Because if she let herself trust him, and it all fell apart, she wasn't sure how she'd survive it. The following days were a blur of meetings and uncertainty. Sienna spent hours preparing for the custody hearing, trying to focus on what was best for Harrison instead of her own heartbreak. Xander stayed close, never pushing but always there. One evening, as she sat at her kitchen table, drowning in paperwork, he appeared in the doorway. "You need a break," she rubbed her temples. "I don't have time for a break." He crossed the room, gently pulling the pen from her fingers. 5 minutes, she sighed, leaning back. "Fine." Xander sat across from her, his gaze steady. "Tell me what's keeping you up at night." She hesitated before admitting, "I'm scared they'll take him away and he won't understand why. He's been through so much already." Xander reached for her hand. "Have you told him?" She shook her head. "I don't want to worry him." His thumb brushed over her knuckles. "He deserves to know what's happening," she exhaled, knowing he was right. That night, she sat beside Harrison's bed, brushing his hair back. "Can we talk for a second?" He blinked up at her sleepily. "Yeah," she took a steadying breath. "Your mom is trying to get better. She wants to see if she can take care of you again." Harrison was silent for a long moment. "Does that mean I have to leave?" Her chest ached. "I don't know yet." He was quiet, then whispered, "What if I don't want to go?" She swallowed the lump in her throat. "Then we'll figure it out, together." His small hand clutched hers. "Promise?" She pressed a kiss to his forehead. "Promise?" The day of the custody meeting arrived too soon. Sienna sat in the courthouse, her heart pounding as Harrison's mother made her case. She looked healthier, stronger, and a part of Sienna knew that was a good thing. But as the discussion unfolded, it became clear that nothing would be decided overnight. "We'll grant supervised visits," the judge said, "and reassess in 3 months." Relief and anxiety warred inside her. It wasn't over, but for now, Harrison was still with her. That evening, when she stepped outside the courthouse, Xander was waiting. The moment she saw him, something inside her cracked. "It's not over yet." He cupped her face, his touch grounding. "Then we keep fighting." Tears welled in her eyes. "I don't know how to do this." His voice was steady. "You're already doing it." And just like that, she knew, she didn't have to do this alone. Weeks passed, and Harrison's visits with his mother began. The uncertainty still loomed, but something else had changed. Sienna had stopped pushing Xander away. One evening, as they sat on his terrace, she turned to him. "I don't want to be scared anymore." His fingers brushed over hers. "Then don't be. I'm not going anywhere." She took a deep breath. "I love you." His eyes darkened with emotion. "Say it again." She smiled, her heart full. "I love you." Xander didn't hesitate. He pulled her into his arms, kissing her with a certainty that left no room for doubt. When he pulled back, he reached into his pocket, revealing a small velvet box. Sienna gasped. "Xander," he held it out to her. "Marry me." Her heart pounded. "Are you serious?" He opened the box, revealing a stunning ring. "I don't do things halfway, Sienna. I want forever with you." Tears filled her eyes. "This is crazy." His smile was soft. "So say yes." She exhaled a shaky laugh, then nodded. "Yes." Xander slid the ring onto her finger, then kissed her again, sealing the promise between them. Months later, Sienna stood at the edge of a sunlit garden, dressed in ivory, her heart pounding in the best way. Harrison stood beside Xander at the altar, grinning as he adjusted his tiny suit. When she reached them, Xander took her hands, his eyes filled with everything she had once been afraid to believe in. "You ready?" he murmured. She smiled, her love for him undeniable. "More than ever." And as they exchanged vows, promising forever, Sienna knew she had found her home. Not in a place, but in the man standing before her and the family they had built together.